want to first welcome you to the webinar. For those who have just joined, the topic of the webinar is SR&ED Beyond the Basics, Optimal Claim Structuring, Mitigating Audit Risk, and more. We have hosted by Kreston GTA and Easily. We have a team from Kreston. Let me introduce them quickly. We have Dale Wilson, who is partner and national leader for credit and incentives from Kreston. Spence Walker, who is the managing director with Kreston GTA. Sarman, who is the CEO, SR&ED and Government Incentives. And my name is Nikhil. I'm director at Easily. So let's get into the overview of the topics out here. We are going to cover two sections essentially. I'm talking about SR&ED as well as talking about SR&ED financing. We'll talk about SR&ED in AI. We'll do a SR&ED review, what to look in for in AI, where to find SR&ED, claiming SR&ED, and then we'll switch over to SR&ED financing. We'll talk about the current capital environment. We'll talk about SR&ED financing. We'll explain it in much more detail and how to fuel your growth with smart debt. So I will have Kreston take it over.
Okay,
All
great.
yours out here.
Great, thank you, Nikhil and the Easily team, and also for inviting us to join to share some of our background and experience in this particular case with AI, semiconductor, and the robotics areas that we focus on. As mentioned, I'm the partner and national practice leader for SR&ED and Government Incentives. Spence is the managing partner, so the leader of Kreston GTA and also Kreston Global within Canada. And we're going to talk briefly about Kreston Global. And Sarman Kachatourian, also the COO and one of our leaders in SR&ED and Government Incentives. Both these gentlemen have a wealth of experience in SR&ED, finance and tax areas, and together we lead the work with our SR&ED and tax clients across all industries within our national practice. Although we'll focus on, as I mentioned, AI, semiconductors, and robotics, much of the information will be relevant across all industries. We intended for this session to be an open, casual, interactive forum, and so the moderators are encouraged to ask questions as we go, and panelists can share relevant experiences. Briefly, we'll cover SR&ED and some AI basics before moving to actual client cases, sharing insights in what to look for, including optimal structuring for multinationals in particular, and avoiding potential audit risks, and of course, the all-important audit survival.
Should I move next?
For those, no, this is fine, thank you. For those who may not know, Kreston is a global firm. We're in 115 countries, assisting many of our clients that are multinationals with operations in several regions, which allows us to draw on global resources for regional or jurisdiction-specific expertise to assist on business expansion and also servicing needs. So very important for folks who are looking to expand out of Canada to other areas, and we often bring our resources to play. Now you can go to the next slide. We are a full-service firm with similar services that you'd expect with Deloitte, KPMG, RSM, or perhaps Grant Thornton, but with a much deeper entrepreneurial focus. In fact, many of our clients, many of our leaders are former Big Four leaders, myself over 10 years with both Deloitte and EY, many large fintech-related companies that are now certainly in the AI space, so RBC, many of the banks, most of the insurance companies, all the telcos, and this is just a snapshot of the experience that we bring to the table. Most currently, we work with the clients. They're often multinationals, so operations in Toronto, US, perhaps India, but also many startups, so with deep technical expertise, including those in the major AI IT hubs, Toronto, Montreal, U of T, Mars, J Labs, and McGill, and some on the West Coast also. Next slide, please. So SR&ED for the AI industry. So AI has been a hot topic. It's actually been very popular for the last decade, but recently has catapulted to great media attention, and for good reason. Finally, we've discovered we can use it for so many new and practical productivity improvements and improving lots of our systems globally. So just want to talk briefly about SR&ED. So I always think of SR&ED, it's what we do to the technology that's important, not that we are using technology. So we don't want to be the users, we want to be the developers. So improving, even subtle, incremental. Um, we also want to have knowledge transferability. So can we transfer what we've created to another use? So truly tangible, things that we can perhaps patent. Those are the things we look for. There's a long list of examples, particularly the last bullet here talks to many different areas. Think about semiconductor large wafer scale, the supercomputer space. What's the biggest issue that we find? So Nikhil, I'm not sure, do you have a swimming pool?
No, fortunately,
Okay,
unfortunately, I don't.
we're going to build you a swimming pool. And if you want, it's big enough that you can invite all the Easley folks and maybe
Maybe
some of the
some people
Kreston
from
folks.
Kreston, right?
That's right. We're some of those
Mhm.
nice folks. So just think about that. So large is good, right? But there's a high maintenance cost, right? It's a good party, but then after we get the maintenance and all the other expenditures for the very large pool. If we think about comparing the semiconductor large wafer space to the GPU space, so that's the space that NVIDIA is in, that everyone has heard about. Think about supercomputers. They'll run at about 50 times performance. So the large wafer scale that the clients that we have worked with and continue to work with are 50 times that. So that pool that's in your backyard, imagine that pool is the size of your neighborhood. So um, uh, more than 500 times the computing power. And things that are interesting about GPUs is that in some cases, they're not large enough to process all the deep learning models. So they'll use accelerators and DLAs and all kinds of things to improve the performance and to meet the requirements of a large DLA model, something that would be suitable for say like a pharmaceutical company and exploring a new drug or other areas that are interesting. And that's the GPU case. In the case of the large wafer scales, that's the pool the size of the neighborhood. The comp time drops from say around 20 minutes for an inference model to about 10 seconds. So distributed clusters, they have some advantages, but certainly the shared memory of the large wafer scale greatly improves the performance and all important compute time. Thinking about how we get there though, it's not just about the hardware. So we talk about hardware a lot, but it's the software that makes it possible. And so software is necessary in the large wafer scale to improve performance and to address many of the challenges that we deal with when we have the pool the size of the neighborhood. And we have to make it more efficient because it breaks. And then we have more shred to look at. So just to give you an idea of where things are going and why we need to explore different topologies for the AI space. Um, New things that are coming out. Certainly, folks have heard about the digital twinning of workflows. So in hospitals, manufacturing settings, that's all real and it's active now. In fact, probably I guess it was last year and a half. So improvements with AI to improve performance in various settings. Mostly, it's on very large scale. So going from what would be uh, ERP systems with linear models to the more complex but highly accurate processing of AI is essentially where most industries are going, particularly in the enterprise space. What was mentioned here in trading systems, I just wanted to throw an example out. If Nikhil, I'm not sure if you have any NVIDIA shares, but let's just say you had
I
10,000
sold them
shares.
off at the wrong time. Anyway,
Well, yeah, it is good. That's one of it's hard to say, but today it looks like it's a good long-term hold. But the idea is if we have 10,000 shares, so we have 10,000 shares and you want to sell them immediately, the systems can't necessarily cope with that. It might influence price discovery. And so AI is often used within the large platforms to distribute the actual workflow required for the processing of your order. So yeah, instead of doing it all at once, it's done over a period of time. So based on the neural network. So anyway, just a little background on AI. And I'm sure we'll all hear more about it. Maybe to the next slide briefly. So this is our team in a nutshell. There's some big numbers here. So 2 billion, that looks big, right? But it's actually the next number, which is 500 million in, what is that? That's appeals. So third-party appeals of third-party claims. So that's a 100% success rate on work that other people have done, but taken back to the government to essentially get it approved. So these are things that have failed, and we've recovered. 100% track record. Many of them are in the Big Four space, so not targeting anybody, but that's what we do. In terms of audit rates overall, it's about 4% audit rate. So although we'll talk about audit risks, overall audit rate's low. And part of that is what's important is to ensure you've got people who are knowledgeable, ensuring that you are doing all three things together. So that means science, financial, and tax, all the same time in the same firm. And ideally, it's a global firm, so you can take advantage of multinational and expansion capabilities.
What's really impressive out here, I
Yep.
thought, was the audit rate, like it's 4%.
Yes.
So that's incredible, I should say.
Yeah, compared to the industry standard, which is north of 30%, that the CRA has adopted, it's very low, and it's a combination of many factors. But certainly we're happy with that. Things to keep in mind. We also do a lot of due diligence, so that we do uncover certain things. As often we have people who are perhaps, folks who prepare things that they might have a degree in one technology, but are actually preparing claims in another. And so sometimes that causes some dysfunction, and results in claims being reviewed. So there are things to do that's important. It's always important to have folks that are experienced in the area that you're claiming. Also, sometimes I might say, when we look at things that have been done in-house, there's always an element of underclaiming. So, and not by any human behavioral issue, but that it's just natural, though, that we may think that our core technology is that we focus on is the key R&D piece, shall we say, and other things are discarded. So it's always important to have a second set of eyes, even if claims are prepared internally. I haven't had a case where I reviewed one that I haven't achieved a 20% increase. And in some cases, it's such as RBC, and others, it's been like a 10-fold increase. Remember, though, it's all about communication. So all those appeals going against the who's who at CRA, which you have to get an appeal through, it's about structuring and communicating, not necessarily about science. Ultimately, that's what we share. But generally speaking, it's a combination of science and communication. Next slide. So very brief. I think most folks are aware of what is SR&ED, but wanted to cover a couple of important issues. As you know, and we'll talk briefly about it, and perhaps others will have some questions on it. But the federal government has launched consultations on SR&ED, so we're looking at SR&ED again, as we have in the past, which is great. A couple of key elements: better support for the growth and success of R&D intensive business, and more importantly, effectively ensure retention of intellectual property. So that's an important and key aspect. It's also important for the companies that are doing filings as well. Federal government is considering also providing further incentives to companies that develop and retain IP in Canada. That's an important piece, including reducing corporate tax rates. So very important. And I think the consultation has input. I think it's up until mid-April. So folks are considering that. We do have a LinkedIn post on this for those that want to review any specifics, and reach out to any one of us if there's further questions. Next slide.
Can I ask you before I move to the next slide? You do both
Sure.
the refundable as well as a non-refundable consultation on SR&ED, correct? Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, the process for filing a claim is the same.
Okay.
Whether or not it's refundable depends on several factors. one of which is pointed out here is whether or not it's considered a CCPC. So there's two parts to that. The private corporation aspect receives enhanced tax credits, which are much more favorable than a public company. So often a private corporation doesn't take that into account when they're going public, that not only will they lose that enhanced credit, but it also becomes non-refundable. So if they're not profitable, and in some cases when you're first going public, those overhead costs can put you into loss positions. And then the other side of it is the Canadian controlled part. So if a company is foreign owned, for so if it's an international company that's opening up a subsidiary here in Canada, they typically won't qualify for those enhanced credits.
Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. So the benefits. So the only reason why we're here today, I mean, the science is important, but the benefits are key, essentially, to the program. We've covered the issue of CCPC versus multinationals. That was awesome. Important. It is important that we sort of communicate what the changes are, particularly as Spence mentioned, when we may acquire a CCPC by a U.S. parent. What is the impact and things to consider, and educate the claimants on what the changes are. Secondly, do not forget about grant programs. So we're talking about, these are the ITCs, or investment tax credits. Grant programs, many are stackable. And so in addition to what's mentioned here, so very lucrative, 65% plus, we can also be stackable with many of the grant programs. So up to 82% recovery in total. So keep that in mind.
I guess, yeah, and one thing to jump in on Spence's
Sure.
last point here, I wouldn't mind going back to that. Spence, are there any mechanisms from a tax standpoint that can be used? Because in the scenario of a foreign controlled entity, the tax credit decrease is oftentimes, depending on what province you're in, it might become non-refundable. Are there mechanisms, especially in these startup corporations, to take advantage of those credits?
Yeah, I mean, if it's in the case where, as Dale mentioned, you're acquiring an entity here, you might have less flexibility. But often you find this more and more now, where international companies are specifically planning to open an entity here to take advantage of what is lucrative tax credits comparatively to other countries.
Right.
So keeping in mind that they without a certain type of structure, that you might not get these enhanced credits, and to quantify that, you can typically look at it as those enhanced credits are double what they otherwise are. And also realizing that while the federal credits are the same across Canada, the provinces can be different. So
yeah,
there's a need to look at all tax components together, not just your traditional means of where's the lowest corporate tax in a province, because some of these have higher tax credits, and also they could be refundable. Quebec is the best example of that, where they have not only a higher rate, but they are refundable.
Whether you're foreign controlled or not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should I move the next slide?
Excellent. Oh, just one more point. Sorry. Thank you, John, for that. In addition to, so I mentioned stackability with grants. Some grants are stackable, so that's potentially up to 82% recovery, and others are not. So if we're in Quebec and we're doing e-business and SR&ED together, we have to make sure that we're optimizing, and that we're not obviously double dipping. So there is a significant analysis required to do that. So the idea is, though, to maximize funding overall with no audit risk, if of course done correctly. So, and next slide. So basic stuff on the eligible expenditures for IT. As most of us know, it's salaries, proxy, and contractors typically. Semiconductors, robotics could be all four. Again, from an audit risk perspective, we need to have solid alignment of science, financial, and tax rules all at the same time, and not cookie cutter. So all approaches must be strictly targeting the claimant's industry and region of operations. need providers experienced in your industry. So what that sort of means is we can't be an expert in injection molding and complete an AI claim. We have to look at how we prepare the claims. Each claim is structured differently in all aspects: science, financial, tax.
Yeah. Hey, Dale, quick
yes.
question on this slide here
Sure.
that we're looking at. Sorry to cut you off
Yeah.
again, but third-party contract payments, 80% value, same value as contractors in all cases, I think. Donations to universities for research. I mean, are there other programs that could be, supported by payments made to university or college, or maybe centers of excellence, depending on what province they're in, or is there something to that? Because if I remember correctly, there's the OBRITC tax credit, which if you're working with a university in Ontario, oftentimes in my experience, when you see third-party payments being made, that might be an indicator that, hey, we should also be applying for OBRITC, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great point. I mean, sometimes actually in some cases the folks might have a separate claim related to the work with the universities. In other words, it might be specifically for the third party payment, and they might have secondary claims for their other internal work that they're doing. And things to think about, though, in the university space is we want to retain the intellectual property. So always make sure if we're having a discussions with any third party that we that contract talks about intellectual property, and potentially we should include elements of the rights to own the ITC should they be generated. So things to keep in mind. And now
Thank you.
into the meat of our webinar. So what about red flags? So maybe I'll mention a few, and then certainly others can add. So salary versus dividends. So some folks will take dividends maybe as their first choice for good tax planning reasons. However, for SR&ED, we need the actual salary, and ideally it's continuous through the claim period. So if we think about from an audit perspective, we want to ensure we actually have salary. It's true salary, not dividend. Salary versus contractors. So some companies may outsource significant amount of R&D. This can be a concern if we have little or no internal salary. So CRA may consider, as they often do, that the shred is performed by the contractor. So in other words, the shred owns the contractor owns the SR&ED piece. So we much prefer to have it structured so that we have at least some internal salary. And not essential, but it is important from an audit risk perspective. New filings attract more scrutiny. So the CRA recognizes it takes time to develop knowledge necessary for preparation of SR&ED claims. So they intentionally target that area. In most cases, they'll start with a simple meet and greet, which is pre-claim service, and the once you do the file. But sometimes it's a full audit in your first year. Companies new to Canada, particularly companies with operations expanding Canada, but making claims as CCPC. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of structuring. They will often target companies that they think should not be a CCPC. Development work that's vastly different than the nature of the business. So we're maybe I'll pick on injection molders. We're an injection molding company. We've got a large software claim. So it's possible, but it could be a trigger for an audit scenario.
Yeah, I think other areas that might stand out in terms of triggers for audit scenarios is what you're actually submitting as a project and not vetting it out completely and separating it from the actual company project into the R&D project and then the shred project that's eligible, right? So having that clear distinction and that line separation between those phases of a project is another thing to be aware of. Right. I mean, there's that aspect, and then you get to the point of perhaps your technical narrative now. And in a technical narrative, the words that you use have very, very important meanings. And so being careful in what words are being used and what words are not being used is, I think, critical. Like, so there's some examples. If you're throwing in words like fine-tuned, or we're doing an application or product development, or there's some trial and error here. And these things stick out to CRA as, hey, did they actually follow a systematic investigation? Maybe we should go look at them. So you want to make sure you catch all these things before that gets into the T661 form. And that's what we do here at Kreston, is we formulate that plan so the confidence is built up front.
Absolutely.
But in any case, yeah.
And if I might just add to that, as we know, back in 2009, when they kind of leveled the playing field and came up with a new template to file, some folks that were preparing 30-page documents, such as RBC and all the folks that had funds to do so, it gave them a unfair disadvantage. So now we all focus on a very short form technical description, but it is digital. It is formed part of the tax return, and it's scanned electronically by the computer to CRA. So word choice is important, and the project should look like science projects. So we don't claim products; we claim one layer below. We claim across products, potentially, as if the technology follows, but it's always about the science.
Yeah.
And they look for patterns. So patterns from technological uncertainty through to advance on all the sequences that go along with that. One other just point that I wanted to mention is claims that have large material expenses. So versus very small internal labor time is very scrutinized. In fact, much like capital was back about a decade ago. So keep that in mind for the filings. I guess next slide. Okay, so I handpicked 3 of my favorites for examples here. So that's the bullets, see, second, third, and fourth. So one talks to semiconductors, the other one talks to robotics, and the last one's oncology, so AI imaging for new cancer treatments. So semiconductor, I mentioned large wafers. I remember Nikhil's pool. Too big is better, right? Than too small, but it's expensive. Right? Unless what? Unless we have software. So software needs to be improved to make the big thing work. And a lot of that has to do with big things fail. And so the software has to address how we process on the hardware. So hardware is always faster than software. But we use software to address the deficiencies in the hardware. And that's what's important. So when it's too slow, and it sometimes is, even on a large hardware platform, we essentially have more shred. So keep that in mind. Robotics. So the robotics are evolving. This is now about cobots and more than we used to see. Certainly, thinking about what a robot does, it used to be about accuracy, and now it's about computer vision. So the robots have the ability to see, is it a pound of butter or a ham sandwich? I know we're just after lunch, I know, but some robots need to behave like humans. So, if we're a cobot, we need to know what a human looks like, so we don't, damage the human. But also, we essentially are using robots now to mimic what humans do. So, in addition to those more important, perhaps more important, or more skilled environments, like if we've got a massive multi-gun structure, so multi-gun servo system that's forming, maybe we're doing an inter-channel weld on a BMW with the front end of a BMW, and we want to get zero tolerance, so we include computer vision to make sure that we're getting the appropriate alignment that we do. So all those things are important to robotics, and definitely AI has massively grown that space. In oncology, it's about AI imaging, so new cancer treatments. Healthcare space is vast, and I mentioned hospitals, digital twinning of hospitals. That's relevant right now in several hospitals in Toronto, throughout the GTA. So new applications are being looked at. And also, as we mentioned, in terms of each of these examples, for my case, they're all multinationals. So all of the things that Spence and Sarman have spoken about with respect to multinationals, where they're located, refundable, non-refunded credits, all are applicable and all are important areas for them. On the science side, so things to think about, in addition to the refundable, non-refundable, is what structure is best. So how do we structure from a Canadian perspective? must have alignment of science, financial, and tax within the Canadian context. So we must be performing not only supporting, but we must have the technological and certain advancement on the Canadian side. So I always think about how we structure. Can't be an overall structure globally.
And that can lead into tax planning when you are an international organization, and the Canadian company is doing a lot of the development and is going to benefit from it. Are other associated entities also benefiting from that? Often a R&D division might not be profitable, but you can have arrangements cross-border where it is licensing back the use to that to its affiliated entities and creating income and potentially profitability, in which case the refundability is no longer an issue. So it's important to have the tax professionals in both jurisdictions working together.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly that refundable versus non-refundable. Last thing we want is a $4 million success. So 4 million in ITCs recovered, a great success, but we cannot utilize them.
Yeah.
So
I guess it looks like we're running short on time. Should we pass it back to Nikhil here?
Yeah, absolutely. The next slide does talk to the things from a financial perspective. Maybe if both yourself and Sarma might think you've covered all of those areas, then we're good to go.
Yeah, I think we have for the most part. Or Sarma, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, you know what? There's actually one example we might be able to cover that would expand and at least for our audience, give them a little bit more insight and knowledge, right? And that's what we want to do here for everyone and listening in.
Sure.
And Spence, I'm thinking about scenario that you and I had become involved with in a client of ours that we share. It's a company based out of Ontario that does hydrogen research, and they were seeking support from a university in Quebec. And then they wanted to use one of their departments for some specific modeling work. And you remember that story?
Yeah, I think the key there is remembering that it's not where you're registered. It's where the individual, the contractors, employees are doing the work. And so there can be some planning around that. So in that particular example, we specifically filed and registered for a portion of the claim in Quebec, and got significantly more back due to their higher credits and refundability there. So.
But it's a matter of really kind of separating out those expenses and being very meticulous and careful about how you prepare that to make sure that, with the registration that has to happen, if it's a new start, if it's a new endeavor, that everything flows through correctly. Because there are various other steps that get involved when you're getting into that level of detail of support for our clients. But it was, I think, for that company, we've been doing it now for, I think this is the third year for him, and he's quite the happy camper. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, Nikhil.
So just one question before we go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's on to you, Nikhil. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, the question I had is that you can be strategic about where to place your contractors. So example, you can place your contractors in Quebec where you get a better rate of return, right? That is good. I didn't know that, right?
Even if you're talking about offshoring, because from a business sense, you might immediately think that you're going to get the same quality of work for cheaper if you're offshoring, but that's not going to qualify for SR&ED because it's not performed in Canada. So it's good to run the math of, well, if I hired them here in Canada and got the credits, what is the net cost versus the cost overseas? And it might end up being one and the same, in which case you'd prefer to employ them here in Canada, which is ultimately one of the objectives of the program.
Yeah, very good. All right, so should I fly through the slides to come to my part of the presentation? Is that okay?
Yeah, please
absolutely.
do.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let me fly here. All right, so thank you very much. Before we get into the SR&ED financing, thank you very much. That was good. That was interesting. That was very interactive. So I truly appreciate it. We'll also have some opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask question and answer. There is a functionality in Zoom for asking those questions. Please use that functionality. It will be more than happy to answer those questions. Don't use the chat function. Use the Q&A functionality in Zoom. to ask those questions, and it's, the more the merrier kind of thing. So I'll be quick with my presentation so that we can give more time to asking questions. I'm pretty sure you have those. Anyway, I'll come to the SR&ED financing part of it. Control your cash flow with SR&ED financing. Let's talk about what SR&ED is and SR&ED financing. So before we get into that, I want to talk about Easily as a company. Easily is part of Brevet Capital. Brevet Capital is a $5 billion hedge fund, by 5 billion Canadian hedge fund out of New York, and Easily is a brand in Canada. We are in Canada, Australia, and UK. And in Canada, we have deployed $175 million. We have funded 325 companies. And we made 900 advances. Which makes us one of the premier SR&ED financing company in Canada. Now, I just want to make a distinction because we do not do SR&ED consulting. We leave it to folks at Kreston who have a much depth of information and knowledge and expertise that they can bring to the table. What we do is to fund those ITCs, right? Just to give an idea about what SR&ED financing is, I just want to, what we do is that we provide a simple, predictable, and flexible alternative to traditional funding. What we actually do is very simple. It's basically pre-funding your SR&ED. It takes probably from the time that you spend your first dollar to the money in your bank account, from SR&ED, probably 18 months, maybe more if there's an audit. We'll fund that SR&ED during while you're collecting, while you're accumulating your ITCs. That's what we do. We pre-fund your SR&ED refunds that comes from the government, right? So essentially, as the catchphrase is that we turn a distant receivable, which is like 18 months from the time that you spend your first dollar on your balance sheet, into cash into your bank account with Easily advances. That's what we do. That's the simple stuff that we do, but very effective. Anyway, I want to talk about some of the funding available at company stages. For the first time in the last 8 years, more people are talking about grants and non-dilutive financing than any other kind of financing, simply because that's the kind of financing that's available today. With VC funding and everything dried up, sort of drying up. So I want you to focus on the government tax incentive programs. That's available right from seed up until Series A. And well, I would argue that it's even available as you go from Series B to Series C. Simply, it's most probably it's non-refundable. It's adjusted against your tax liability. But the government tax incentive programs like SR&ED, the media tax credits, are probably one of the most powerful program that is there, and that is available through the entire life cycle. And with the energy tax credits being added, I think it is an immense source of funding as we go along. I want to talk about what is the current capital raising environment. It's not good. It's difficult. It's tight. As you can see from the numbers, in 2021, it was $15.7 billion being funded, down to $10.5 billion in 2022, and now it's 6.9. I don't expect 2024 to be any better than 23. In fact, it'll be worse. And what I believe is that you'll have, obviously there is an impact of that in the sense that you'll have less VC money available. You have you'll have term sheets that come with all sort of caveats in favor of the funder. And I believe that the term sheets will no longer be investor friendly, and debt will play a major part in the capital stack. In fact, I would add that not only debt, but debt and grants and non-dilutive funding will be the major part of funding as we go along. So that's the current environment. In fact, what I'm seeing out there, I'm an angel investor myself. I'm seeing a lot of folks who have raised Series A, Series B coming back to angels to raise their next round of capital because VC money is not available. That's like going back again to where you started from, right? Kind of thing. So that's the situation right now. So I'm just gonna move this out here because it blocks the view. Anyway, all right, SR&ED. So let's talk about some of the statistics, and I think this is from 2021. 20,000 claims, 4.3 billion ITC value, both refundable and non-refundable. 50% of that is refundable, which means that you get your money back instead of being adjusted on the tax liability. And the SR&ED tax credit accrual rate by jurisdiction varies. Obviously, federal is 35, as Dale had said that before, and the provincial rates vary. Quebec being the most favorable, I would say, right? It's probably anywhere from 40 to 30%. And this is how SR&ED works. Essentially, you're spending your money on R&D throughout the whole year, and you're accumulating your ITCs, which is input tax credits. The year ends, you accumulate, you go to a consultant like Kreston, you accumulate all your data, and they put the T661 out, which is the format for filing your SR&ED. You file your T2 and T661, and probably in another 6 months' time, you get your SR&ED back. So from the time that you spend your first dollar to the money back into your account, probably it's 18 months. And from the time that the year ends to the money in your account, probably 6 to 8 months, right? That's the average I know, right? Our statistical average is like 6 months once you file. So once you file the CRA, 6 months after that is what you get, unless there's an audit or unless there is a challenge out there, right? So, I mean, your money is basically frozen for so long a time. I mean, the point is, can we use that money now when you require that project, when you're growing, when you want to hire people and all this kind of stuff? And the question and the answer is yes, absolutely. So on the right-hand side, the status quo is that you're waiting for 18 months to get your money. That's one option. You can wait for that, or you can come to you can do SR&ED financing, come to easily. As you can see on the right-hand side, instead of waiting for 18 months, you can have that money available for you each quarter. Each quarter, that money can be made available, and then you can use that money for whatever reason, because it's unconstrained money. You can use it for anything that you want to within your company. You can fund product iterations, you can extend your runway, and that is critical right now. In fact, a lot of VCs are asking, hey, listen, what's your runway? And if your runway is 6 months, you're not getting the money. If your runway is 12 months, they might think, and if your runway is 18 months, probably you're on your way to get funded. And this is a way to sort of extend your runway. You can hit your milestones, especially for life sciences companies, which have milestone-based funding. This can be a good way to extend your runway and achieve some of the milestones that you intend to achieve.
Absolutely, and keep the technical people employed, right? Keep them on staff to continue to grow your business.
That's a good point. Thank you for that. I think instead of losing those very critical people, which is very hard to get, this money can help you keep those people on the payroll. And eventually, bad times are followed by good times, right? It's all temporary at the end of the day, and lo and behold, you have the good people with you, right? So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. That's awesome. So I want to share with you, this is hot off the press. This is a 2023 report. Actually, you can go to the website and check. Maybe you can provide the link when we send out some details. This is Canadian Venture Capital Market Overview for 2023. Non-dilutive, when I go to the events, when I talk to people, everybody used to talk about VC financing, angel financing, venture debt, and all this kind of stuff, right? For the first time, I'm hearing advisor, mentors, companies talking about non-dilutive financing. And we saw, according to statistics, around 500 deals, let's put it this way, in 2023. And 500 non-dilutive deals in 2023, and out of which 433 were financed through SR&ED financing. That's huge. 90% of all those deals were financed through SR&ED. That is immense. This is the first time that we're seeing these numbers, and understandably slow, right? And we probably did, SR&ED probably did 90% of the deals. The rest of 10% was venture debt, which is, again, non-dilutive, but it's a different structure altogether. And I can say that Mark will not allow me to say that 100% of those deals of SR&ED financing came through us or through our subsidiaries, right? So it is, what I mean to say out here is that that SR&ED financing it should be part of your capital stack. It should have the same weight as your VC capital, angel capital, and it should be factored into your cash flow. It is such an important part of your growth plan as you move forward, right? So anyway, that's me. That's not me. That's CVC is saying that. So so we can provide that link to that report out there. Anyway, so I'm gonna fly through this a little bit in interest of time. So you can basically fund your growth with smart debt, and I call that smart debt because of certain reasons. Shared financing is debt financing. Yes, it is debt, but it's smart debt, and I'll tell you why it's smart, because it doesn't depend on the revenues to service. One of the biggest problems with debt is that you need capital to service it. It needs to be serviced. But with shared financing, you really don't need external capital or your revenues to service it, because it's serviced through the refund that comes from the government, right? So I consider that to be smart debt. Transparent terms and cost. I've been in the business for 10 years. I know that a lot of those providers that were there before didn't have transparent terms and cost. You sign up for something and you find that, your cost is twice of that. With Easily, it's transparent terms and cost. There are absolutely no personal guarantees. Startups are risky business, and then to attach a personal guarantee for that is something not done. And I think we have always skipped away from not asking for any personal guarantees. Competitive cost structures, if you look at our cost structure, it's probably bank-like or near bank-like, given the risk spectrum that we have. And the coolest part is that you don't have to wait for 3 months to get it. You can get your funding done within 5 to 10 business days, maybe 15, if there are some stuff. So it's really, really quick. There is no costly monthly reporting, so you're not spending part of your resources doing the reporting that a lot of other SR&ED funders ask for. That's not what you're designed for. You're designed for getting that money and using that for your projects, and receive your government funding on your schedule rather than government schedule, right? And that is something that is very, very critical for the startups out there, right? And that's why I call this as a smart debt. It is debt, but it's really not debt, right? It's taken care of kind of thing. And I call it smart debt, and it's very founder friendly. All right. So obviously the question is, what is the funding? If it's that easy, what is the funding criteria? Essentially, there are 3, right? So we expect our clients not to have substantial arrears with CRA. So you should not owe HST or any payroll deductions or any of those things, because the CRA always have the first lien on all those payments. Employees are in Canada and salaries are paid in Canada. A fact that, which Spence alluded before, is that R&D activity has to be carried out in Canada and the salaries are paid in Canada. There should be ITC eligible activity. There are certain criteria for that, for it to be considered as an R&D. So you should be within that framework. And our Easily's financial threshold is 100,000 in annual funding, and this can be taken in smaller quantities, drawn throughout the year. So 100K is essentially a funding criteria. That's the minimum that will fund. There is no upper limit. You can go to $3, $4, $5 million. If you fall within the criteria, we'll issue a term sheet. That's not a problem. And of course, we are working with, and this is the cool part, you don't have to be a revenue generating company to get funding from us. You don't have to be a profitable company to get funding from us. And you don't even have to have a SR&ED history to get funding from us. You could be the first time claimer of SR&ED, and we could fund you, provided you fulfill those criteria that are there.
Nikhil, I just want to ask, do you require them to be a CCPC and be eligible for the refundable amounts, or are you also interested in ones that do need to have taxes in order to get those credits back?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. We focus only on the refundable tax credits, simply because it's an asset, right? When you're doing the SR&ED receivable is an asset, and we only fund the refundable part of it. So if you are a non-CCPC and getting non-refundable, unfortunately, we cannot fund that part because that's adjusting the tax liability. Here's the check that's coming from the government, which we consider as an asset, and we can fund it very, very easily. So thank you for asking that question. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So how do we get started? Very simple. connect with me or one of our team members on a schedule a call. We'll talk and we'll assess the best way to move forward and upload your documents. It's very easy, and within 48 hours you'll get a pre-approval, and we can, from application to funding, it could be as low as 10 business days. Really, I've seen that. Okay, so no waiting for no bunch of documentation and all this kind of stuff. Send the documents, 48 months for not 48 months, 48 hours for pre-approval, and then within 10 days you'll get the money on your account without much of documentation, without whole bunch of documentation, I should say. Anyway, so we'll open the forum for question and answers out there. When you are putting when you're asking questions, please do that through the Q&A functionality of Zoom. And I'll put the names, the phone numbers, as well as the emails of the folks from Kreston and Easily on the presentation. And I'll open the floor for asking questions. More than happy to answer any questions. All right, guys.
Oh, there's one.
All right, the first question, thank you. If we get grant funding, can we spend it on R&D and then claim SR&ED on it? It's for you guys.
Yeah, the answer is yes. As long as you're out of pocket, and these are expenditures that show up as deductible expenses for otherwise corporate taxes. So if you were, sorry, let me see, are we talking about grant funding or funding from Easily here? Just want to clarify.
Yeah, no, it's grant funding. So if we get grant funding, so I'm assuming that they got the grant funding and then they spend it on R&D.
Sorry,
and then
so
claim SR&ED on it.
Okay, so yeah, so let me clarify that. That depends on the type of grant funding. In some cases, for example, with the IRAP program, where the funding is specific for certain individuals that are performing some of their duties overlap what would be eligible for SR&ED, you can't double dip, right? So, but in some cases, the grants might be a little broader in how they're used. So you can internally determine how much of that grant was used for SR&ED activities and not, and therefore, you're not reducing your eligible expenditures entirely by that grant, but only a portion of it.
So the answer, it depends, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. If I might add, so the goal of using an experienced provider that does both SR&ED and grants encourages the optimization of both the grant timing and the SR&ED timing. So sometimes, in addition to the explicit usage of the fund, so for a particular unit of labor, it may also vary in timing. So we might get the grant funding, but before or after the period in which we're claiming SR&D, in which case we can use the funds for cash flow in a current period to continue to pay salaries. So anyway, it's important to have those folks that can manage both, like our team.
Yeah.
There's another question out there. Can you speak, and this is about the recent SR&ED consultations, and this might be a very broad answer, but anyway, can you speak to the recent SR&ED consultations underway? What changes are being considered? So I think the question refers to some of the consultations underway in terms of, I think there's a talk about changing the nature of SR&ED and everything. Can you throw some light on that if you can?
Sure, I can start, and maybe Spencer, Simon, do you want to add? So I think it's not unusual for when they conduct a review for it to be appear to be wide in scope. But I think clearly there's two targets. One is about improving the retention of intellectual property within Canada, and also, in addition to that, providing incentives for folks who do retain IP within Canada to reduce corporate tax rates or other potential incentives. I must say, from a practical standpoint, folks that will, our clients will talk about the process of intellectual property, and it is a long process. It is expensive, and so it really does, require a big commitment. in addition to what the work related to SR&D or other development activities, it's time consuming. So, but very important at the same time.
Cool, very good.
Yeah, and I think I just add that you know, Canada is known for having one of the most stable SR&ED programs in the world, and there's been many of these consultations that, for the most case, have only had subtle implications, and sometimes more along better defining what is eligible for SR&ED. But one of the unique aspects of SR&ED versus other grants is grants are a little more specific to certain areas that the government is looking to focus on for development. Whereas SR&ED, if it falls under the definition, then anything is eligible in any industry. So it is unique in that aspect.
Absolutely.
Good. So here's a question, I think, for Measley. When we submit a request for easily funding, does the expenditure get reviewed by an accounting firm to ensure it is eligible expenditures? So I think the process that we follow within our company is that when we submit a request for easily funding, our internal team will review it, both on the financial side, on the technical side. We have enough data to sort of review it. Now, if we need any specific information, we'll reach out to the SR&ED consultant or the accounting firm to sort of validate some of that, what is being claimed. But we won't, for example, reach out the moment there's a funding. Every time we don't reach out to the accounting firm every time we get a funding request. It's only when we do our internal review and we find that we need to fill in some gaps of information that we'll reach out to folks like Kreston if they have done the SR&ED consulting or they have the tax stuff on that. But most of the time we are able to do that internally because of the data, a huge amount of data that we have around that. So that's the answer to the question. There's another question to you guys. Anybody can take it. What can you do to help mitigate the risk of CRA review? And then the next follow-up question is that, I think you touched on that. How do you maintain such a low audit rate? I think probably you answered that question during the presentation, but maybe you wanna. Should I repeat?
Yeah, maybe I can chime in a little bit here on the point of how to mitigate against a CRA review. I kind of alluded to some of the points before, but you want to make sure that you know, all your I's are dotted on all your T's are crossed effectively before that document gets clicked, selected to CRA. So having a process in place to ensure that, especially very early on in the engagement when you're working with Kreston GTA and our innovation department with our team here, it's effectively critical to build out that case such that CRA can't dispute it in a meeting with them. If there's going to be some form of interaction, that anything that's been submitted in our narrative is effectively speaking to what actually was done. So how do you mitigate against that? I mentioned there are certain verbiages, you know, you should be aware of and not use. You know,
and that's
sure...
where you're trying to avoid that kind of preliminary review, right? Because it goes through different stages once it gets to the CRA SR&ED department.
Yeah, at CRA, there's an initial stage. Once a claim gets submitted, it goes through some form of risk assessment, you know, that we're not privy to in the public here and as consultants. But beyond that point, the goal is to mitigate that, but optimize it at the same time. So it's taking that full holistic approach look at the entire claim and ensuring that it meets the key criterias like the scientific and technological uncertainty, like the systematic investigation by means of experiment or analysis, and that all leading to a scientific and technological advancement, right? So
you might have several different projects. Some are worth more than other, and some have you know, a greater risk of being audited. In some cases, you might say that this particular project is not strong from a technical standpoint, and the numbers are low. So let's make the strategic decision to leave that out of the claim so that we can fly under the radar. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, keeping in mind, it's about relationship development with the CRA. You know, once we put our best foot forward. So you know, utilizing a third party provider such as ourselves, who are experienced, you know, helps to you know, create that relationship. That
and Dale, they have a lot more information now about the firm on the claim itself, but the consulting firm And guaranteed part of the risk assessment is who that firm is. And, you know,
Yeah.
some have a history of reviews or audits that get denied or kicked back, which creates a greater risk of those clients being selected for audit in the future.
So the lower audit rate kind of acts as a feedback, right?
Absolutely.
In a positive or negative, wherever it goes.
Yeah, you don't want that black check mark beside your name at CRA.
Well, thank you so much. I think we have the last two questions. There are two layered questions for me. What are your rates for SR&ED advances, and are personal guarantees required? I'll go with the personal guarantee first. No personal guarantees whatsoever. We probably did maybe around 600, 700 loans from the day that we started, maybe 800, I don't know. None of them have had personal guarantees on them at all. And here's the reason why. When you start an enterprise, a startup, there is a huge amount of risk involved in doing that. Entrepreneurs are putting the entire I should say, they're taking a huge amount of risk, and you cannot layer with another level of personal risk, in terms of the house, personal wealth, or whatever that is. So we do not take any personal guarantees. Some of the SR&ED lenders do, but we do not. What are your rates for SR&ED advances? Our rate for SR&ED advances, or what we call as LTV, loan to value, is 75%. Which means that if you have a SR&ED of $100,000, we'll advance you 75% of that, which is 75%. Just like mortgage, you have $1 million house, you'll get the HELOC of 80% of that, right? Something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So our advance rate is 75%. That's it. I think we don't have any further questions out here. Before anything you want to address, folks, from your side? Last parting comment from your side before we bring this to close?
No, I think just the comment is that everything needs to be looked at from a complete perspective, both from an international, tax, geographical. It can't look to be in isolation and should be looked at proactively. SR&ED shouldn't be an afterthought after your year end is finalized.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you so much, the team from Kreston, everybody, Sarmaine, Spence, and Dale, for your great contributions out here. How can they reach you? Okay, that's, whom do you reach, and how can they reach you?
Well, any one of us, really. We're all three of us are in constant communication with one another. So you reach one of us, we'll converse with each other and get connected. But you can go straight to our website at www.krestongta.com. You'll find all of our credentials there and all of our links to connect with us. What other mechanisms?
Yeah, and our phone numbers just right on the screen here. Feel free to
right
give us
there.
a call directly.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for today's webinar. Thank you so much, everybody who's joined us. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Nikhil. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.